This week, the masonry contractors from Chicago showed up again to tackle the second phase of our facade repair. You noticed as you tried to navigate into the building. And they quickly got down to work on the bowing and shifting wall at the corner of 4th and Main Street just down there, tearing it completely to the ground. I've been worrying about that wall for years, since the start of the 2016 We Are Called Capital campaign, which had targeted 3 projects. The first was the Undercroft renovation, which we've been savoring for the last 7 years downstairs, the creation of a handicap-accessible parking lot on the other side of the parish house, just over there. And the third, we took a verse from Isaiah, not unlike the verse from Jeremiah this morning that spoke about ancient ruins. This one goes like this: "Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to live in." We took that verse as a rallying cry to tackle the third area of our capital concern, plugging the gaps in our walls. Well, we started with the Bell Tower project in 2023 because it was a more life-endangering project, but it was so far out of sight that it didn't nag at us, or me at least, as the way that the leaning walls have along 4th and Main Street. So this week, I felt a strange sort of relief. On Tuesday, when the stones that had been carefully numbered on Monday started being removed from the wall and stacked neatly in the parking lot. This relief, however, was short-lived, for by Thursday, we had discovered some bad news. The wall was not resting on a foundation of much more than crushed stone and dirt. And the interior wall that's supporting the staircase was basically a big, desiccated pile of dry shale stone and dirt. The mortar had turned to dirt, and that it would need to be demoed, shored up, and a new interior wall installed, because the Medina sandstone facade needs to be tied back into something firm to hold it tight and firm. There goes the budget. So by day 4 of this current phase, we encountered the first change order of the entire 9-year process. The first one. I am meticulous, and I always tell our contractors there will be no change orders, because that's where they make their money. And I say, forget it, no change orders. But this one is a non-negotiable, it seems. There's no other responsible choice. I tried. I brainstormed with Manny the foreman for a couple hours, trying to come up with any other workable solution. But apart from covering the whole problem up and ignoring it and leaving it unaddressed, there was no other way. For once you know how structurally compromised the hidden interior infrastructure is, there's no choice but to tend to it, as scary, as painful, as expensive as that is. Of course, we know that intuitively in our own bodies. When we get a major injury, falling down the stairs or tumbling off a bike, our first impulse is to get up quickly, dust ourselves off, and say, "I'm fine, it never happened." We may go home and put a bandage on that swelling finger that was broken, trying to ignore that it's not, put some ice on it. But quickly we realize we're in need of more acute care, and we end up having to face the severity of the injury. But that does not stop us from trying, for we all love a good Band-Aid to hide away the reality of our wounds. When we do go in, I'm the person that never looks. I don't want to see how bad it is. I've been working with this facade Medina sandstone wall as a metaphor this week. From the outside, St. Luke's building casts an imposing figure of permanence. The $125,000 that Mary Pendergast donated in 1890 to create a fireproof church, so says the plaque, looks like a church that could stand forever, until you start to notice the small areas where stones have shifted, where an arch is broken, and there's a strange crack where water seems to be flowing down into the building. When you remove the exterior facade walls, you witness an unsightly patchwork of cheaper stone and faulty brickwork hurriedly thrown together. not meant to be seen by anybody. This proclivity seems to be one of the foundational realities of all religious communities. Indeed, we see it in today's gospel. The reading starts out with a typical statement about the type of people that are forming the crowd following and surrounding Jesus. It says, "All the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to hear Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, 'This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" Yes, throughout the Gospels, whether it be according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, there are generally two types of people the text talks about who are attracted to Jesus and his teaching. The faithful religious practitioners and insiders, often identified as the Pharisees, the scribes, lawyers, or Sadducees. And the other extreme, the tax collectors, the sinners, and others not following the religious laws of the land. Of course, there was a majority of other normal folk, a whole crowd of folks somewhere in the middle, but we rarely hear about them. Just like in our modern political context, our attention is always pulled to the extreme fringes, and we ignore the silent majority. Yes, in the gospel, there's always a conflict fomented by the religious leaders who are dissatisfied with Jesus' lack of concern with purity, proper decorum, and rule following. They're angered by all the attention that he pays to the despicable and deplorable people in their society, to the tax collectors who collaborate and cooperate with a foreign power to extort money, hard-earned money from them, starving them into poverty, to the sinners who publicly live morally compromised lives, flouting all the conventions, doing the things that gets them a little bit ahead by not following the rules. They worry that Jesus is condoning their behavior. They fear that by eating with them, he's justifying the ways that they walk through the world. They simply want to maintain a dependable law and order reality to follow, a moral code to live by. And of course, these are valid concerns. These are noble aims. We all want an orderly way to walk through the world and safety produced by it. When you commit to living a life of purity, striving to follow the commandments and the laws, you end up sacrificing a lot. You commit to a serious effort, and when you witness others seeming to carry a lighter load, you're bound to get frustrated. But Jesus is not turning his back on the commandments or a serious life of devotion. He's simply suggesting that there might be a simpler way. He's proposing that we find a truer foundation for our faith and a more just society. He's pausing to pose a question. What if instead of falsely focusing on the merits of our own efforts, we considered the grace that God provides for all of God's people? Wouldn't life be more joyful if we could depend upon God's goodness instead of our own? Wouldn't life be less burdensome if we weren't forced to hide away our wounded feelings and supposed deficiencies? What if instead of feeling shame and hiding in the shadows, we were able to come out into the light of God's love? And so he tells two lovely stories of God's desire, God's hunger, of a God that looks and seeks the lost, the lonely, and the misguided. Jesus' attention focuses on the disoriented and the outcast one, not to devalue the other 99, but to rather invite the whole 100 to understand what God is doing. And then we experience the incredible joy and transformation that God is doing when we embrace God's goodness. But the Pharisees, it's always but the Pharisees, are threatened by this reorientation and disorientation of what they've invested in. They've sunk their whole lives into the old way, striving to be good and faithful, and this new way does not honor what they've done, their sunk costs. In fact, it undoes all of their work. So they double down and they cling to the externals, ignoring the call to the internals, which Jesus boldly calls out all throughout Scripture, but particularly in one brutal passage in Matthew where he says, "You hypocrites," you know the one, "you clean the outside of the cup and the plate, but inside of you're full of greed and self-indulgence. For you live like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of bones of the dead and all kinds of filth. So you also on the outside look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." So it seems that, just like me, the Pharisees are focused on the facade walls, because that's what's noticeable to them and to everyone else. So all the attention focuses on the facade, things that look like they're enduring and permanent, but are just that, a facade. It's only when the facade shifts, gaps open, stones crack, that we're forced to look more deeply. It's then we finally have a chance. Then we can finally stop living in this constant state of denial and pull back the veil, shrouding our lives. And then we're given an opportunity to create real strength and integrity in our own lives. It's a little bit like core strength, right? No one likes to do sit-ups and all those things, but that's what we need for mobility. And it comes not from taking a false sense of pride in our efforts, but resting in a God who shapes and molds us. The proclivity to cover up the unsightly and embarrassing realities of our existence is not just a religious occupation. It's very much a human one. This week in our country was an emotional and tumultuous one. On Thursday, we remembered the tragedy of September 11 terrorist attacks and the terrible loss of life that happened 24 years ago. It was a moment in our history when the facade walls had shifted and fell. We all came together to grieve and to notice our lack of interior cohesion and integrity. In the midst of our sorrow, a nation came together in unity. Never again, we said. And there was a real chance to change the way we might come together, continue to come together, and create community in a new way. But it seems to me that instead of making the drastic shift, we've continued to focus only on the externals. We missed the opportunity. We missed the opportunity to acknowledge our common humanity and work together to stitch back the fabric of our society, creating a shared set of values shared by all, a game plan that we could all agree to. We know this because this week we witnessed yet another violent act of a lone radical. The assassination of a public figure exercising the freedom of speech enshrined in our democracy is deeply troubling and demonstrates that as long as one of us is lost, all of us are lost. Perhaps this is what Jesus is talking about this morning in the parable of the sheep. Maybe it's a statement not about the 1 or the 99, but about the 100. Isaiah says, "All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to their own way." My friends, we have lost our way. The facade has shifted, the stones are cracked, and our foundation is shaken. We can no longer live in denial. When you look beyond the facade, how can we but discover the world as it is, fragmented, broken, and disintegrating? And maybe it's always been that way. In a way, it has. But Jesus came to show us a different way, a resurrecting way that doesn't hide our brokenness away, but embraces it Jesus shows us a way where we seek the lost and the lonely, not only out in the world, but in ourselves. Like the metaphorical oxygen mask, seeking the lost starts in our own hearts. It starts when we realize that we are the lost and the lonely. Then we can create some space for questions that might help us reorient again. Instead of mounting on a high horse about those inflexible and self-righteous Pharisees and Sadducees, or substitute Democrats and Republicans, we have a chance to get in touch. Can we see those traits in ourselves, the ones we so oppose in others? Can you reach the sinner in yourself and ask, what keeps the defiled parts of you from coming to the table? What in Jesus allowed him to associate with those notorious sinners? What does it say about his relationship to his own inner darkness? Today we must stop and ask ourselves, what is the lost coin in me? In what ways am I a lost sheep? Table fellowship in the ancient world, and even today, represents a full embrace of those at the table with us. As such, there's an inherent risk that you'll be seen as condoning others' behavior. Take this test for me. Imagine in a moment that if you were one of those who condemned the actions of October 7th, and you grieved the Jewish hostages still not safely returned home, would you share dinner in your house with the leaders of Hamas? Or, if you've awakened from sleep with images of slaughtered children of Gaza, and you're horrified by the famine there, and you're not afraid to use the word genocide, would you break bread with President Netanyahu? Or perhaps that metaphorical, imaginary situation is too far beyond you. Just ask yourself, when was the last time you intentionally sat down to eat with members of a different political party, a different sociological status? When was the last time you went outside of your comfortable circle to meaningfully engage and listen and learn from someone else? It's tempting, all too tempting, to create an us versus them, to act as if them wasn't also us, when in reality there is no us and them, there is just a we. We forget that there is no purity in any situation, that in the human body we are actually more inhuman than human. 70% of the cells in our body are actually not human. They're bacteria. And we act as if we can be pure and sold one way. It's just not true. We're at an important moment as a community, as a nation, as individuals. Our lives are filled with gaps and holes. We experience them all too acutely. All of us are lonely. We know that's true. And we have an opportunity this morning to commit ourselves, to repair the gaps, to fill the breaches, to create streets that are livable. We must follow the way Jesus shows us. It comes when we joyfully live in those gaps, when we stop denying they're there, stop trying to gloss them over or hide them from ourselves, when we integrate our shadow sides into our light sides. Then, and only then, can we begin to create a just society that's knit together and committed to something different. This week I discovered a poem by Linda Buckmaster called Flowering. And she wrote it in contemplation of the ruins of the 7 churches of Inishmore on an island off of Ireland. ruins that perhaps could be this church one day if we don't continually rebuild them. She writes, pick a crevice, a homey gap, between stones and make it your own. Grow a life here from wind, rain, and the memories of ancients embodied in limestone. The bees will use you for their sweet honey. The rock will soften under your touch. You will draw moisture from fog and hold it. Your presence will build soil. This is all we have in this life, all we own. A flowering, an opening, a gap between stones for tiny, tender roots. Small things can change the world. Single lives can make a world of difference. My friends, there is a gap in our hearts. There's a gap in the world. May you let tiny, tender roots grow from your life, and we may start to create something life-shaping. May we begin to live that resurrection power that Jesus showed us. Amen. Standing in body and spirit, please join me in affirming our faith